It's the 28th of January 1969. Workers on an oil platform about 9 kilometres off the coast of Santa Barbara, California, are drilling a well to a depth of about 1 kilometre beneath the seabed. A massive burst of oily sludge and gas shoots up into the air. It's a blowout. They cap the pipe and stop the leak, but only temporarily. Immense pressure from the reservoir of oil and gas below the seabed breaks through the soft sandstone of the Santa Barbara Channel. The worst oil spill yet in American waters is underway. 8 days earlier, Republican Richard Nixon had taken the oath of office as America's 37th president. At the time, the environment was barely on his agenda. It got one passing mention in his inaugural address.
In protecting our environment, enhancing the quality of life, and all these and more, we will and must press urgently forward.
The 1968 election had been about the war in Vietnam, law and order and civil rights, not the environment. But as the massive slick of oil, balls of tar, dead birds and fish from the Santa Barbara spill washed up on the shore of Nixon's home state of California, pollution was suddenly a major issue.
Why can't we get any decent drinking water in this town anymore?
They shouldn't be allowed to dump all that crud in our trout stream.
Meanwhile, rivers in the industrial Midwest were being treated as sewers and dumps.
The Cuyahoga River in Ohio is so loaded with the waste products of petroleum distillation that it is actually in danger of catching fire.
That danger was very real. In June 1969, a train crossing a bridge over the Cuyahoga sent sparks onto the slick below, and the river running through the city of Cleveland was suddenly in flames. Less than 3 years earlier, New York had been blanketed in a deadly smog over the Thanksgiving weekend, killing up to 400 people. Just as humans were reaching for the moon, our impact on the Earth was becoming uncomfortably clear. Back in Washington, congressional leaders and the White House were jolted into action. A Gallup poll showed the environment had jumped from being 10th to the 5th greatest concern for Americans, more important than race, crime, and what was referred to as teenage problems. Wisconsin Democratic Senator Gaylord Nelson organised the first Earth Day for April 1970.
Winning the environmental war is a whole lot tougher challenge by far than any other challenge ever to confront mankind.
Good evening. A unique day in American history is ending, a day set aside for a nationwide outpouring of mankind seeking its own survival. Earth Day. President Nixon announced the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency. Democratic Senator Edmund Muskie was the early favourite to run against Nixon for the presidency in 1972. He called public hearings into the Santa Barbara disaster and proposed making oil companies fully liable for spills. Nixon duly signed that into law. White House polling showed concern for the environment at just 1% before the Cuyahoga River fire. 2 years later, it had risen to 25%. In late 1971, another poll showed 78% of Americans would be willing to pay to clean up the air and water. Almost half said they would accept a 10% reduction in jobs for a cleaner environment. Ed Muskie introduced the Clean Water Act in October 1971. 3 months later, he formally announced his candidacy for president. 1972 was looming as the first environmental election.
To have clean air and clean water, and a decent environment for everyone.
Ed Muskie has written virtually every major piece of environmental legislation passed by the Congress in the 20th century.
Muskie for the country.
In meetings with environmentalists, Nixon called concerns about pollution a political fad, but Nixon was nothing if not political. He ordered federal land be converted into public parks. He announced more protections for endangered species and increased pressure on Congress to act, neutralising Muskie's advantage on the issue.
These problems will not stand still for politics or for partisanship. They demand to be met now. By meeting them now, we can make 1972 the best year ever for environmental progress.
Ultimately, Ed Muskie's presidential campaign faltered in the face of a White House dirty tricks campaign and his own shortcomings as a candidate. Nixon sailed to re-election in a landslide. For the rest of the 1970s, the focus remained on reducing pollution and the management of waste. And the laws signed by Nixon had a major impact, improving America's air and water quality. Skyrocketing petrol prices helped to convince Americans to give up some of their gas-guzzling cars. By the 1980s, environmental legislation moved on to concerns about damage to the Earth's ozone layer. And in the 1990s, the discussion turned to global warming and now a more complex understanding of climate change. The lesson from 50 years ago might be this. Politicians like Richard Nixon may not lead on an issue like the environment or even believe it any more than a fad. But when they sense public opinion is shifting, they can get on board and bring change, even if it's not for the purest motives.